introduction, and thanks CND for inviting me to speak here today. Like Rob just said, I'm from Unison, and we represent public service workers, 1.3 million members. And I am proud to be from a union that has such a long-standing commitment to peace and against nuclear weapons. In 2016, our union said that there is no justification for renewing Trident nuclear weapons, especially at a time when public services were under such huge strain. The British economy needs real investment in public services, not years of cuts, and certainly not a nuclear weapons system designed for the Cold War era. Instead, the government should be investing in our schools, hospitals, and social care system. Now, this statement from 2016 still rings true today. Our policy, passed at our national delegate conferences over the past few years, strongly opposed the government's proposals to ramp up military spending from 2.3% to 2.5% of the national income by 2027, and has made the link between the decision by the government to increase military expenditure at a time at the expense of our public services. So I'm proud that Unison were involved in the TUC's historic win, where the TUC rejected the increase in defence spending and militarisation. Building upon our long-standing policy, this cemented our position: wages, not weapons. With us supporting this motion alongside the majority of TUC affiliates, this made a right to the wrongs of the policy that was passed in 2022 in favour of increased military expenditure, and put our Labour movement at the forefront of fighting for peace. As well as all the hard work happening within the trade union movement and building the movement for peace, I want to pay tribute to the RMT and CND and all of those that were involved in the alternative defence review. I think there's some copies around that you can pick up, as it's so pivotal in challenging the dominant war narrative and offered an alternative vision for peace, justice and security. The production of the Alternative Defence Review gave us the basis to challenge the myths around militarisation and jobs, and examine closer how militarisation has distorted our national priorities, fuels global insecurity instead of protecting us, and diverts spending from public services and our much needed social infrastructure. It exposed it as economically inefficient, exposed military expenditure as economically inefficient and environmentally destructive, and ultimately how it has stifled a more sustainable and just economy. The type of economy that our Labour movement and the working class in Britain so desperately need. So I believe that mainstreaming this document is critical in building the peace movement in the Labour movement and beyond. Firstly, like I said, we need to mainstream the document. As I've outlined before, it gives us the basis of challenging the mainstream narrative around war and offering working class people an alternative. And this is something that I believe we can unite around in the Labour movement if used effectively. I represent young workers on the National Executive of Unison, and for the past few years, we have been working hard to develop this understanding of militarisation and its dangers in the youth section of the union. Next week, we have our National Young Members Conference that has over 120 delegates from across Britain and the north of Ireland. We have on the agenda 3 motions in favour of welfare, not warfare, and against the drive to war for our futures. I am proud that one of these motions includes a call to disseminate the Alternative Defence Review widely amongst over the 100,000 young workers that we have in Unison. This is what we must be doing across the trade union movement and our communities to get the truth and alternative out there. And I genuinely believe that the Alternative Defence Review is a strong basis for rebuilding our strong peace tradition amongst organised Labour. When the Labour government was first elected last year, Keir Starmer's first act as Prime Minister was to attend a NATO summit in Washington to assure the US that Labour were quite happy to continue to support US imperialism and militarism across the board. across the globe. Since then, with Labour's complicity and active involvement in the Israeli war machine, and the Israeli war against the Palestinian people and continued drive to war in Ukraine, they have solidified their place as the party of war. The government have proudly said, this is the highest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War. This shows that this Labour Party is getting this country on a war economy with plans to boost the so-called national security spending to 5% by 2035. In the government's own words, Britain is moving to a war-fighting readiness to deter threats and strengthen the Euro-Atlantic security in the Euro-Atlantic. As the UK steps up to take on more responsibility for European security, we must have a NATO-first defence policy and lead. But what does this NATO-first policy actually mean? It means lining the pockets of arms companies and not investing in the youth and public services of our country. It means the UK-Germany Defence Agreement, which is aimed to strengthen the east flank of NATO by the so-called land deterrence, but actually means us spending £1 million of public money to get their foot in the door of buying German weapons and vehicles to use in war, instead of investing in well-paid jobs for young people. It means continued complicity in the war and genocide against the Palestinian people, as Britain's involvement in the EU and NATO's military partnership is responsible for facilitating this. Young people across Britain have been mobilising against the genocide in Gaza at unprecedented rates, and the Labour government's increase in militarisation has brought home to us the dire consequences of war. One thing is certain, it's becoming clearer that this drive to increase arms production across Britain and Europe will be used to kill innocent children, men and women in the name of the Labour Party's commitment to NATO, which Starmer describes as the bedrock of our security, but in reality leads us to a cycle of forever wars. With the current job market being decimated and young people being forced to accept low-paid, insecure work, the government's argument for well-paid jobs could be seductive for Britain's youth. However, as I've outlined above, this argument is not only wrong, but it's a lie to justify the government's arms race in which we all end up losing. So whilst the government is sucking the life out of our public services and cutting welfare in favour of war, our response as young trade unionists is clear. We robustly oppose this government's drive to war and increase arms production, and we must fight for a renewed peace dividend of social programmes for the sake of all of our futures. Britain's youth need investment and well-paid jobs, not bombs. Germany last week agreed a plan to conscript young people to the army in order to be on a war footing. Earlier this year, German Defence Chief warned how the Western NATO alliance had to prepare for a possible Russian attack within 4 years. How absurd is that? Compulsory enlistment could be considered by the German government. This is, of course, deeply unpopular with the German youth, who have been fighting to oppose this new measure. But looking to Europe, are we that far away from a similar situation in Britain? We have to organise these young people who have been mobilising against the genocide of Gaza and get them organised against the war drive in Britain. As young workers, we must, as a priority, expose this political system for what it is, callous in pursuit of imperialist wars for profit. The increased militarism of this government can be summed up in the quote from Harry Magdal's book Imperialism, From the Colonial Age to Present. Imperialism necessarily involves militarism. Indeed, they are twins that have fed on each other in the past as they do now. It's clear that the youth of this country do not benefit from this government's drive to war, which benefit to arms dealers and capital. So for the sake of our futures, trade unions must lead from the front, oppose all increases in military expenditure and wars. We must continue to demand an end to the military-industrial complex and for a truly independent foreign policy which has peace and social justice at its centre. We must continue to raise the cause of peace in the Labour movement and its understanding of imperialism and war, and call for investments in our services and youth, and we must mainstream the alternative defence review. We have to fight for a world in which all people can live in peace, human dignity and justice prevails. So instead of NATO first, instead of war first, how about the working class and the youth of Britain first? The future is ours to win, so we have to struggle for it. Thank you, comrades.